The Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation and the Subcommittee on Research and Science Education will come to order. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Protecting Information in the Digital Age, Federal Cybersecurity Research and Development. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. Before we get started, since this is a joint hearing involving two subcommittees, I want to explain how we will operate procedurally so all members understand how the question and answer period will be handled. As always, we will alternate between the majority and the minority members and allow all members an opportunity for questioning before recognizing a member for a second round of questions. We will recognize those members of either subcommittee present at the gavel in order of seniority on the full committee, and those coming in after the gavel will be recognized in order of arrival. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for our opening statement. It is next to impossible to ignore the relevance of cybersecurity these days. News coverage is increasingly focused on cyber vulnerabilities, covering stories such as companies losing personnel information or customers' financial data, or a government database being compromised by a malicious hacker. Perhaps most unsettling is that most stakeholders agree that our national cybersecurity response has not kept pace with the threats. In early 2008, the need to increase network security was brought to the forefront when President Bush formally established the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, CNCI, to deal with widespread cyber attacks on federal networks. Early in his administration, President Obama committed to continue this effort and expanded it through the 2009 Cyberspace Policy Review, which identified a number of problems to be addressed through both near-term and mid-term actions. At that time, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology held a series of hearings evaluating the state of cybersecurity research and development and the recommendations contained within the review. Security efforts are often focused on the past and designed to respond to the most recently faced attack. However, the technology sector is exceptionally dynamic, and where possible, we need to attempt to anticipate vulnerabilities and future threats. This is where research and development and proper coordination can make a contribution. It has now been a number of years since the review identified vulnerabilities across federal agencies. We are here today in part to evaluate what progress has been made. Additionally, as new threats emerge, we must assess whether we are staying ahead with research and development. Finally, we must make sure that we are appropriately tracking federally funded research and development initiatives. Since multiple agencies have cybersecurity responsibilities and federal efforts in this area are growing, I am concerned that agencies may compete with each other for cyber ownership. Congress must ensure that agencies are working collaboratively to prevent work from being duplicated at the cost of precious taxpayer funds. Several agencies before us today have an important role in the development of cybersecurity standards. We should not underestimate the value of standards, whether they are minimum security measures for use by federal government agencies to protect information or a framework to address cybersecurity risks for critical infrastructure. The lead responsibility for working closely with industry to develop successful standards has historically fallen to NIST. We would like to ensure that any comprehensive cybersecurity legislation effectively leverages the expertise of all federal assets. I should also note that today's hearing is focused on federal cybersecurity stakeholders. Notably absent are those who design, build, own, and operate the majority of the digital infrastructure in our nation. To that end, I intend to hold further discussions related to cybersecurity issues through future hearings of the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee that will include voices from the private sector. I would like to thank my co-chairman, Congressman Brooks, for sharing leadership on this important hearing. I also thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a productive discussion. I would now like to recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Wu, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this very, very important hearing, and thanks to all the witnesses for being with us today. More and more of our personal information is making its way online, and our nation's entire infrastructure, from traffic systems to the electricity grid to manufacturing to our health information, is becoming increasingly dependent on secure and reliable access to the Internet, and I can think of few topics more important for this committee to address than cybersecurity. In the last administration, it was referred to as the greatest threat to our national security standing today, and I agree with that assessment. Anyone following the headlines recently knows that cyber crimes are becoming more frequent. Sony's PlayStation Network has been repeatedly targeted, exposing personal information of over 100 million users. A server at NASA was recently targeted, revealing satellite data, and social media sites like Facebook are constantly targeted by phishing scams and other cyber attacks. I'm pleased that this administration has provided Congress with a legislative framework to consider ways to address various vulnerabilities. The proposal focuses primarily on the role and authority of the Department of Homeland Security in securing non-defense systems. I look forward to working with Chairman Quayle and the other members of the subcommittee and the full committee to ensure that NIST's expertise in information security is maintained, especially in the development of technical standards and as a facilitator of private sector collaboration. I am also interested in ensuring that any comprehensive House bill advances cybersecurity research and development and lays out a clear strategy for building a highly skilled federal cyber workforce. According to OMB, last year federal agencies spent $12 billion on cybersecurity to protect the $80 billion federal information technology infrastructure. Additionally, the federal government funds about $400 million in cybersecurity research each year. Despite this considerable funding and many federal employee hours spent on this issue, the assessment remains the same. Our cybersecurity is insufficient. We need to use existing resources more efficiently and with specific, achievable goals in mind. Previously, federal efforts have been output-oriented, focusing on metrics such as the number of programs, funds spent, and the number of interagency working groups, rather than outcome-driven. I'm pleased that the current administration is focusing its efforts on achieving outcomes, such as reducing breaches of federal systems and cases of identity theft, as well as ensuring the security of smart grid and health IT systems. It's true that the administration's cyberspace policy review re-emphasized recommendations from previous reports, including improving information sharing, bolstering cross-sector coordination, modernizing the research agenda, and enhancing public cybersecurity awareness. But the review was also successful in outlining a concrete vision and set of objectives that have been steadily addressed by the administration over the last 2 years. For example, the creation of a national initiative for cybersecurity education to educate consumers about online risks and to provide training to build a skilled cybersecurity workforce. I'm fond of saying that some aspects of cybersecurity are rocket science, but others are relatively simple, like wearing your seatbelt or washing your hands. The development of the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace to combat online fraud and strengthen privacy, and the recent release of an international strategy for cyberspace that calls for the development of international standards aimed at preventing barriers to trade, commerce, and an open environment that fosters free expression and innovation around the world. By addressing these recommendations, we are laying the building blocks for a new outcome-based approach to federal cybersecurity. The agencies appearing before the committee today have a significant role to play in creating that foundation. During today's hearing, I hope to learn how each agency has progressed toward meeting the goals and objectives outlined in the administration's review, the agency's plans going forward, and the impact of the administration's legislative proposal on their current roles and authorities. This information will help guide the committee's ongoing efforts to protect our nation from cyber attacks. Again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I now recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Research and Science Education, Mr. Brooks, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quayle, good morning and welcome to each of our witnesses. As my fellow chairman pointed out, our hearing topic today, cybersecurity, is a dynamic issue that plays a role in a myriad of fields from our nation's infrastructure to our private lives. It is an issue that is not only of interest to the government and industry, but also affects each of us personally. The Research and Science Education Subcommittee, of which I am the chairman, shares jurisdiction of this issue with the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee for a number of reasons. In large part, this is due to the essential basic research taking place on cyber-related issues, conducted in large part through the National Science Foundation's Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, CISE. Likewise, NSF has an important role to fill regarding the cybersecurity workforce pipeline in education. In addition, the subcommittee also authorizes and has oversight over the cyber-related work of the Interagency Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program, also known as NITRD or NITRD, which coordinates the nation's unclassified federal research development efforts in cybersecurity. Today, our witnesses include a number of federal agency representatives who will be able to discuss specific agency priorities related to cybersecurity research and development, as well as the larger issue of collaboration and coordination across the federal government. While I recognize and understand the essential functions of cybersecurity research and development, I'm looking forward to an earnest discussion on the recent FY12 budget requests. NSS CISE Directorate requested over $728 million for FY12, a 17.7% increase over FY10. The FY12 budget request for the NITRD program is $3.866 billion, a $73 million increase over FY10 expenditures. Our role in Congress is to ensure that federal investments are made wisely, and once made, investments must produce significant value for the nation. I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Pinsky for an opening statement.
Good morning. I want to thank you, Chairman Quayle, and also Chairman Brooks for holding this hearing. I agree with my colleagues' remarks on the nature and severity of the challenges we face in cybersecurity in both the public and the private sectors. Cybercrime is a problem for our national security, for businesses large and small, and for every single American. Like Mr. Wu, I can think of no more important topic for this committee to address. While there are several other agencies not here today who also play a significant role in cybersecurity, the three agencies that are represented here are all central to these efforts. I know some of my colleagues will address the cyber efforts of NIST and DHS, so I'd like to highlight those of the National Science Foundation. NSF is the agency overseen by the Research and Science Education Subcommittee, and is second only to the Department of Defense in its support for cybersecurity research. In addition, NSF uniquely funds research across the entire range of science and engineering disciplines that are relevant to cybersecurity, and joins only DARPA in supporting truly game-changing research. It is also significant that the director of the Interagency's NITRD program is here today, since all of the civilian agencies coordinate their cybersecurity R&D activities through NITRD. I want to highlight one particular area that is often left out of discussions on cybersecurity research needs, and that is the human element of cybersecurity. People are perhaps the most important part of our IT infrastructure, and according to many experts, they are also the weakest link in many systems. Better cybersecurity education for both the general public and for current and future IT professionals is vital. However, there's still a lot we don't understand about how humans interact with technology. Therefore, more research into the social and behavioral sciences has the potential to significantly improve the security of our IT systems. I'm happy to see that the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate at NSF now has a more explicit role in the agency's Trustworthy Computing Initiative. In the end, our cybersecurity efforts can only be as strong as our weakest link. I look forward to hearing more from Dr. Jahanian about that. We last held a series of hearings on cybersecurity in 2009 when I was chair of the Research and Science Education Subcommittee. We learned at that time about the respective roles of different agencies and received extensive outside expert testimony. We also learned that a lot had changed since Congress, led by this committee, enacted the 2002 Cybersecurity R&D Act. That is why last Congress I introduced the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2010, building on the 2002 Act. That bill, like today's hearing, was a joint effort between my subcommittee and T&I, then chaired by my friend Mr. Wu. Mr. McCall, who has been a strong leader on cybersecurity issues, joined me as the lead Republican co-sponsor, and the bill passed the House by a margin of 422 to 5. Since our bill, like so many others, never made it through the Senate in the last Congress, I'm now joining Mr. McCall in introducing an updated version. We are still making some small modifications, but I'm hoping we can introduce the bill soon, perhaps as early as this week. I know the witnesses were asked about this legislation, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback today. We are anticipating that our R&D bill will be part of a bigger bipartisan cybersecurity bill in both the House and Senate. The efforts to move a larger bill have stalled for some time over disagreements about how to assign leadership and coordination responsibilities across the government. I am glad that the President is taking an active role in this discussion, and I hope that the proposal the White House sent up to Congress 2 weeks ago will help to move efforts along in both chambers. I look forward to working with both my colleagues in the administration to ensure the development of a strong cybersecurity strategy. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here this morning. I look forward to hearing your testimonies, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witness panel. Our first witness is Dr. George Strawn, the Director of the National Coordination Office for the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program. Prior to his appointment as Director at NIST, Dr. Strawn served as the Chief Information Officer at the National Science Foundation. Next is Dr. Farnham Jahanian, Assistant Director of the Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering at the National Science Foundation. Prior to joining NSF, Dr. Jahanian served as Chair of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Michigan. Next is Ms. Cita Furlani, the Director of the Information Technology Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Previously, Ms. Furlani has served as Director of the National Coordination Office for Information Technology Research and Development. Finally, we will hear from Rear Admiral Michael A. Brown, Director of Cybersecurity Coordination at the Department of Homeland Security. Rear Admiral Brown is also assigned as the DHS Senior Cybersecurity Representative to the United States Cyber Command. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize our first witness, Dr. George Strawn, the Director of the National Coordination Office for the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program.
Thank you, and good morning. As you say, I'm George Strawn, Director of what we call the NCO, National Coordinating Office of Networking and Information Technology Research and Development, called both NITRD or NITRD, as the case may be. I'll use those shorthands, NCO and NITRD, in the rest of my comments in the interest of brevity. With Dr. Farnham Jahan of NSF, I also co-chair the NITRD Subcommittee of the National Science and Technology Council. I would like to thank Chairman Brooks, Chairman Quayle, Ranking Members Pinsky and Wu, and the members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to come before you today to discuss protecting information in the digital age and NITRD's role in federal efforts to improve cybersecurity. The NITRD program provides for the coordination of research and development in networking and information technology across 14 federal agencies and many other partners. Their combined efforts represent America's primary investment in research and development for IT-related technologies in general and cybersecurity in particular. The NCO supports the coordination of the activities of the NITRD program. My written testimony responds to each of the 5 questions posed by the subcommittees. In my oral comments today, I just want to highlight 3 points. First, the NITRD community strongly believes that this nation's cybersecurity infrastructure must be made more secure and trustworthy than it is today if we are to sustain our technological and economic leadership role in the global information age. Indeed, the agency-developed NITRD strategic plan states that one of the most significant tests of technological leadership in the years ahead will be the ability to engineer and build IT systems that inspire high levels of confidence because they function as intended, safely, securely, reliably, and cost-effectively. The agencies added that fundamental research to ensure that digital networks, systems, devices, applications, and communication processes earn and deserve the trust and confidence of society thus constitutes an essential foundation for the nation's future. Advancing our IT capabilities with radically improving cybersecurity technologies directly supports such U.S. priorities as national and homeland security, economic innovation, global competitiveness, healthcare reform, and job creation. My second point is that because cyberspace interconnects us all, both the problems and solutions of cybersecurity transcend any one federal agency, any one sector, or even any one nation. They involve not just a small number of discrete technologies, but global-scale interdependencies among a vast array of technologies. The scope and complexity of these cybersecurity challenges absolutely requires effective coordination of research and development between the federal agencies themselves, as well as collaboration with their private sector partners. And this is a central role of the NITRD program. This coordination process is exemplified by NITRD's 2 cybersecurity and information assurance groups, one called a senior steering group, the other called an interagency working group, which have responded to the cyberspace policy review with innovative conceptual framework for R&D intended to radically change the game of cybersecurity in favor of the defendants. NITRD's recent developed strategic plan for federal R&D and cybersecurity brings me to my third point. Visionary federal R&D in cybersecurity is necessary, but not sufficient. Much of cyber infrastructure is in the private sector, and much of it is overseas. Federal strategic plan for R&D and cybersecurity expressly calls for new forms of federal outreach and partnerships with the private sector and international stakeholders to accelerate the deployment of promising research into commercial applications and adoption. This transition to practice is currently exemplified in a variety of interagency projects of NITRD members and within several of the NITRD working groups. Thank you for your interest in cybersecurity and the opportunity to appear before you today. The NITRD community looks forward to working with you to realize the goal of a cyberspace in which we can all have trust and confidence.
Thank you very much. I now recognize our second witness, Dr. Farnham Jahan, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairman Quayle and Brooks, ranking members Wu and Pinsky, and members of the subcommittees. I am Farnam Jahan, Assistant Director for the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation. As you know, NSF is dedicated to the support of fundamental research in all disciplines, to the advancement of science and engineering, and to educating a new generation of innovative leaders. I welcome this opportunity to present NSF's investments in cybersecurity research and education this morning. Investments in unclassified long-term research are critical to an effective national strategy of achieving trustworthy cyberspace. It is important to note that many powerful information technologies deployed today capitalize on fundamental research outcomes generated decades ago. NSF brings the problem-solving capabilities of the nation's best minds to bear on these challenges. It also promotes connections between academia and industry, which help to protect the cyberspace, secure the nation's critical infrastructure, and fuel job growth. In FY 2011, NSF will invest up to $130 million in cybersecurity research, including $55 million in the cross-cutting trustworthy computing program at NSF. Its projects range from security at the microscopic level, detecting whether a silicon chip contains a malicious circuit, to the macroscopic level, determining strategies for securing the next generation electrical power grid. Fundamental research in cryptography, formal specification, verification techniques, and security testing all contribute to improved methods for building systems that perform as intended, even in the face of threats. Research in secure programming languages and methodologies, secure operating systems, and especially the virtualization mechanisms on which many of the security of cloud computing depends, are also prominent in NSF's portfolio. Cybersecurity investments are also made in the subdisciplines of computing and information sciences, for example, in the physical cyber systems, algorithmic foundations, and networking programs in my directorate. Center-scale activities play an important role in NSF's portfolio. The Trust Center, a multidisciplinary collaborative research effort, is focused on science and technology for developing and using secure information systems with almost 30 industrial partners. 4 cyber trust centers and 2 industry university cooperative research centers also focus on a number of foundational challenges. Research outcomes and innovations developed with the funding from NSF and other federal partners are now being used by the private sector and government agencies to protect the nation's cyber infrastructure. In recent years, research outcomes have led to the formation of numerous startup companies in the IT sector that bring innovative solutions to the marketplace. Education is embedded in all these projects through the training of graduate students, many of whom will join the cybersecurity workforce. Career NSF most prestigious program for junior faculty carries specific requirements for the integration of research and education. Research experiences for undergraduates and other NSF program gives students opportunities to do cybersecurity research. Scholarship for Service program provides tuition at academic institutions in exchange for government service following graduation. To date, this program has provided 1,400 scholarships at 34 institutions and has placed graduates in 30 federal agencies. The Advanced Technology Education Program educates technicians and has 3 regional centers. CyberWatch in Maryland with 35 community colleges, 15 universities from 20 states, and an enrollment of 1,800 students. The CSSIA Center in Illinois, 8 institutions from 5 states with more than 1,400 enrolled. And the 3rd regional center, the CSEC Center in Oklahoma, with 45 institutions from 8 states and almost 2,000 students enrolled. NSF has been actively responding to the near-term and mid-term action plans outlined in the Cyberspace Review Policy. NSF also participates in the Interagency NIDRD program, which ensures the coordination of cybersecurity investment across 14 government agencies. To conclude, the Internet plays a critical role in tightly integrating the economic, political, and social fabric of our global society. These interdependencies leave the nation vulnerable to a wide range of threats that challenge the security, reliability, availability, and overall trustworthiness of all IT resources. In my testimony today, I have emphasized that NSF's investment in cybersecurity research and education allow our society to benefit from a robust, secure, dependable infrastructure that supports all application sectors, including those on which our lives depend. This concludes my testimony. I would be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes our next witness, Ms. Furlani, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Quayle and Brooks, Ranking Members Wu and Pinsky, and members of the subcommittees. I am Cita Furlani, the Director of the Information Technology Laboratory at the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss NIST's role in protecting information in the digital age. Since the early 1970s, NIST has developed standards to support federal agencies' information assurance requirements. Through FISMA, Congress reaffirmed NIST's leadership role in developing standards for cybersecurity. FISMA provides for the development and promulgation of Federal Information Processing Standards, or FIPS, that are compulsory and binding for federal computer systems. The responsibility for the development of FIPS rests with NIST. NIST works with federal agencies, industry, and academia to research, develop, and deploy information security standards and the technology that is necessary to protect information systems against threats to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information and services. Consistent with its mission and with the recommendations of the President's Cyberspace Policy Review, NIST is actively engaged with private industry, academia, non-national security federal departments and agencies, the intelligence community, and other elements of the law enforcement and national security communities to coordinate and prioritize cybersecurity research, standards development, standards conformance demonstration, and cybersecurity education and outreach. Our research activities range from innovations in identity management and verification, to metrics for complex systems, to development of practical and secure cryptography in quantum computing environments, to automation of discovery and maintenance of system security configurations and status, to techniques for specification and automation of access authorization in line with many different kinds of access policies. NIST is actively contributing to the objectives of several of the near and midterm action plan activities from the Cyberspace Policy Review. The National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education represents the evolution of the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, the work on cybersecurity education, moving it from a federal focus to a broader national focus. NIST has assumed the overall coordination role for this effort and is finalizing a strategic framework and a tactical plan of operation. NIST and the National Security Agency lead an interagency activity to establish strategic objectives in pursuing the development of timely, technically sound, international, voluntary, consensus cybersecurity standards, including a commitment to the development of an international standards framework. NIST is an active member in each of the groups coordinating cybersecurity R&D among federal agencies, including the NITRD, CSIA, the SCORE, and the Senior Steering Group, all designed to actively share cybersecurity R&D information across the policy, fiscal, and research levels of the government. NIST participated in the creation of the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, which calls for a national program office to coordinate needed federal activities. This office will be led by NIST and will have full access to NIST technical expertise, as NIST has been actively involved in the development and interoperability of secure identity management for many years. NIST believes that effective cybersecurity legislation requires an appropriate balance between short and long-term goals, as well as providing motivation for strong collaborations between federal agencies, industry, academia, state and local governments, and other interested stakeholders. Indeed, the legislation proposed by the administration is focused on improving cybersecurity for the American people and our nation's critical infrastructure. NIST looks forward to leveraging its legacy of research, development, and standards in this area with other federal and private sector partners. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Furlani. The chair now recognizes our final witness, Rear Admiral Brown, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Quayle and Brooks, ranking members Wu and Lipinski, and distinguished members of the committee. It's a pleasure for me to be here today to discuss the important issue of cybersecurity. My testimony will provide an overview of the current cybersecurity environment, the cybersecurity mission carried out by the National Protection and Programs Directorate, and the coordination of this mission with our public and private sector partners. As you well know, these operational missions benefit from and drive many of the requirements for the research and development work of the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. We also coordinate closely with our interagency partners, such as the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in the development and application of cybersecurity standards that are relevant across our mission set. Of note, the legislative proposal recently introduced by the administration would, if enacted, provide a single statutory authorization which would enable DHS to better fulfill our critical infrastructure and civilian government cybersecurity responsibilities. As you've stated, we are very dependent on digital networks as part of our day-to-day lives. Without a secure cyberspace, many aspects of modern life, our economies, our healthcare systems, and our transportation and communications networks would grind to a halt. DHS's roles and missions reflect bipartisan agreement as established under the previous administration and expanded upon under the current administration. We have several specific roles in cybersecurity. The first is protecting the federal executive branch civilian agencies, in other words, the .gov world. The second is leading the protection of critical infrastructure such as power plants, financial markets, communication systems, and major transportation hubs. Thirdly, DHS must lead the national response to major cyber incidents. Finally, we lead the educational efforts to raise public awareness about the need for cyber hygiene and responsible use of computers. These missions require a full range of partners, including other government agencies, the private sector, and individual users of the Internet. At the Department, we believe cyberspace is fundamentally a vibrant civilian space similar to a neighborhood, a library, a marketplace, or a workshop. We also know that it can facilitate conflict, exploitation, and criminal activity. Just last year, a leading cybersecurity firm reported a 93% increase in cyber attacks compared with the year before. DHS's role within that space, which constitutes both the .gov and the .com environments, results in unique technical, legal, and policy challenges. Our responsibilities cover distributed networks with vastly different ownership, configuration, and legal considerations as compared to DoD networks that are relatively closed and owned by DoD. We have accomplishments. We're moving on several fronts. The Department's deploying an intrusion detection system known as Einstein to protect the .gov world, and we're providing the latest tools and information to our infrastructure partners to support the financial services, transportation, energy, and defense industries, to name a few. We've also deployed flyaway teams to assist private companies as they seek to prevent and combat cyber attacks against their networks. In addition, the Department has spearheaded the development and testing of the first ever National Cyber Incident Response Plan, which enables us to coordinate the response at all levels. This is not a standalone document. It's been used to respond to significant real-world events this year. We're focused on building a world-class cybersecurity team of professionals, computer engineers, scientists, analysts, to secure the nation's digital assets and critical infrastructure. From the National Cybersecurity Division, we've coordinated with the Science and Technology Directorate for many years on research and development requirements for cybersecurity. Our NCSD's Research and Standards Integration Team communicates regularly our R&D requirements for inclusion in S&T's broad area announcements and small business innovation research information. The NCSD research is currently working with S&T to identify and pursue specialized technologies that could be integrated into our operational posture. In the past, while some of adopted technologies did not work well, we have worked to prevent this problem in the future, and NCSD is finalizing a technology transition process to ensure these new technologies will deliver the desired functionalities and be compatible. In addition, we have regular ongoing efforts with NIST in developing standards related to software assurance, smart grid technologies, and supply chain risk management. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
I'd like to thank the whole panel for their testimony today. Now, I want to remind members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. My first question is to you, Dr. Strawn. In your testimony, you stated that the research in NIDRD's portfolio is managed, selected, and funded by one or more of the 14 member agencies under their own individual appropriations. Now, my question is, how do we avoid duplication here? And is there some sort of mechanism that you currently have in place to monitor where all these federally funded research initiatives are going and what they're accomplishing?
Thank you for the question. We do believe, Mr. Quayle, that one of the primary functions of the NIDRD program, which provides for interaction among the agencies and discussion of what their plans and programs are for the coming years results in cooperative ventures, in finding out that other agencies are doing something that they thought they would need to do, and now they can rely on the other agency's results rather than them. So filling gaps and avoiding overlaps is something that I think we've always considered to be an important part of our obligations.
So you think that you have the ability to make sure that we're not having duplicative research and also within the various agencies? And one of the other things that within that is that there are some concerns that as various agencies try to fight for turf, especially within the cybersecurity realm, that they're going to be less likely to want to work with other agencies because they have that protective turf battle going on.
Well, I suppose agencies are a little bit like companies in that there's co-opetition going on, cooperating at some places, and yet there's a limited amount of federal funds and so forth. They're in competition for appropriations. Certainly, the NIDRD program as a venue for cooperation doesn't enforce or attempt to boss the agencies around in these regards. But because when they become aware of what each other is doing, we have seen plenty of cases where it's led to cooperation and better extension of federal funds.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Ms. Furlani. When you have the changing nature of cyber threats, and we're going to be starting to develop some standardization for cybersecurity procedures, and standardization always conjures up a very inflexible model. How do we make sure that we do set up the procedures so that we have the flexibility to address these changing cyber threats, because they will continue to change as years go on?
We frequently change our recommended standards for the federal government, and we do that because we work so closely with industry who is aware of what's changing, and they give us that feedback and that recognition of how we should be modifying. We put out our drafts for public comment. We get comments internationally as well as locally, and we adapt as we go. And we also work to move our standards and other standards along in the international arena, because we also have the responsibility to work with industry to develop voluntary consensus standards and make sure that the federal government is using voluntary consensus standards wherever applicable. So being aware and connected with industry as closely as we are has been very effective in making sure that we're adapting as we move along, because technology moves just too fast for standing in one place.
So as different best practices are developed in various industries that you deal with, especially on the cybersecurity front, that's where you would just have an evolving standards practice, basically?
We are flexible enough to adapt to new changes, new needs, and we listen, and we have our mechanisms that work that through and get them, again, try to move them into the international standards so our industries can compete globally.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Rear Admiral Brown, the administration's proposed cybersecurity legislative package tasked the Secretary of DHS with working with interested parties to propose standardized frameworks to address cybersecurity risks to critical infrastructure. The package also states that the Secretary should work with the Director of NIST to develop alternate standards if the voluntary standards developed by the interested parties do not meet the required criteria. What role, if any, does the Secretary envision for NIST in the initial voluntary standards development process?
Sir, we already have a very close relationship with NIST. We've been working in particular on several parts of the private sector and believe that building upon that information in the relationship that we have in the development of the standards and from DHS's operational perspective, that we will continue to leverage that and apply that in the rule sets that we'll be putting forward.
Okay, thank you very much. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Wu for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to use my 5 minutes to put 2 questions to whomever on the panel wishes to answer them. The concept of anonymity and privacy are frequently conflated in our discussions. And setting privacy aside for the moment, I'd like to focus on anonymity. It's very, very legitimate to very much completely identify someone who is going in to look at, say, medical information or banking information, whereas if someone is going to read a newspaper or do a posting on a political wall, at least in our society, we would view that as something which should be protected by anonymity if the user so chooses. There are increasingly attribution technologies. Also, if you come off your Facebook page, you are locked in by your community pretty much as your identity. And there are also proposals for an inherently secure internet backbone, which may also lead to traceability on the internet. Could you all address how these, what we view as advantageous technologies, can also be reconciled with a continuing need for freedom of the internet, so that certain societies, certain governments will not be further empowered to crack down on what we view as inherently private and desirable activities?
Let me take a quick crack at that, Mr. Wu. I think that better identity management may also help assure anonymity in the right situations. For example, in the academic world, library checkouts are an example of where anonymity has typically been appropriate and probably continues to be. But let's say at a university, only students of that university and perhaps some others are permitted to check books out or do what have you. If we have the ability to do identity management by attribute as opposed to just by name, if a person can log into a trusted identity management and indicate that they are in fact a student because it's trusted who they are, then the attribute of being a student can be used to check out the books and the publications at a library. And so better identity control can enable anonymity in that sense, as well as enable full identity when appropriate.
Yes, I'd like to amplify on that because of the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. This is one of the goals, to have an ecosystem where there might be different types of credentials, and you could choose, each individual could choose whether they want to be anonymous today or whether they want their bank to know who they are, that they really can move that money around. And so that is one of the goals. We have a workshop coming up in June to explore what it means to have such a system, and we'll be talking with industry as usual to understand how this could be facilitated.
I would just add that, as my colleague highlighted already, identity management is key to this. I would also like to add that at National Science Foundation, we have a number of research activities that look at this issue, particularly at anonymization techniques, identity management. And we all recognize that ultimately we have to reach a balance between protecting public's privacy and public safety, national security, and our economic prosperity. So I do want to add that we do have a number of research activities that are ongoing addressing the very issue that you highlighted.
Thank you very much. My second question is directly international rather than obliquely international, and that is that just as the proposed legislation preempts a lot of state legislation, so many of the problems really are of a multinational nature. But there has been already a lot of jockeying about international standards. Could you address the issue of how to negotiate truly international standards and the issue of certain countries jockeying for advantage in setting up islands of technology, and these islands not only grant commercial advantage, but they also potentially decrease internet freedom in those islands?
Certainly, this is an issue that we work with, and the openness and the way that the international standards are developed, and we try to make sure that our experts are participating actively. And the value is seen of having standards that everyone can use, and that setting that baseline has been pretty effective in solving this issue, and we continue to watch out for such opportunities to make sure that the understanding is there, because it's really a value proposition that if we can collaborate on these, we all benefit.
Let me just add that I look forward to NIST continuing to take a lead role in international negotiation. Thank you for your tolerance, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. The chair now recognizes Mr. Brooks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As much as I'm going to be able to be here for the entire hearing and some of the other members have time constraints, I'm going to defer my time to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I appreciate the courtesy there. I have a couple of questions, and the first question is for all members, all witnesses here today. And Dr. Furlani, I realize you've touched on the subject briefly in response to a chairman's question a while ago, but I'd like to ask all of you this. One of the concerns that is often voiced about the federal government's approach to cybersecurity is that it does not take into consideration often enough the expertise that is available in the private sector. And so I'd like to ask each of you how your agency intends to collaborate with the private sector, private industry, to take advantage of their expertise. And I guess, Dr. Strawn, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I think that a little historical example might help. I mentioned previously that our agencies have been working on a strategic plan for cybersecurity research, and that plan has not only involved agency collaboration, but has involved several interactions with the private sector, holding workshops where private sector experts are invited in to comment and assist us in formation of that plan. We have a history of doing that with other activities as well, and we continue to see that mechanism, both in asking for public feedback from documents that we prepare, and prior to that, asking input as we prepare documents from experts in the various fields.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jahanian?
Yes, happy to answer that. Our panel review process actively involves not only scholars from academic institutions, but also government folks as well as experts from industry. So that's one aspect of it. We run a number of workshops that involve both academics as well as individuals from the private sector as they advise us about our programs, about future of research investments, and so on. But I also want to highlight a couple of other things. For example, the research contributions that I have listed in my written testimony and other outcomes and innovations that have been developed with National Science Foundation's funding and other federal partners are now being used by the private sector as well as government agencies. In fact, recently I did a quick count of past 5 years of various technology that's been transferred from the cybersecurity program from National Science Foundation. I was pleasantly surprised to see the number of technologies that have made it into the private sector, commercialized, used by federal government agencies and by the private sector. I counted 20 startups that have been launched just over the last 2-3 years based on the research that we funded. I also highlight that some of this, of course, is leading towards securing our infrastructure, protecting our national security, but also is fueling job growth. Another program that I want to highlight is that National Science Foundation relies heavily on SBIRs and SCTRs to fuel innovation and foster adoption of that innovation by government as well as the private sector.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Furlani?
Yes, as you mentioned, I had mentioned it earlier that we hardly do anything without talking with industry first. If we see a problem that we need to consider and how we might formulate some strategy for protecting cyberspace, we would typically open a workshop and ask anyone of interest to come and discuss it. Then once we collect our thoughts and put something down in writing that people can react to, it's put out for public comment. Right. And we take those comments extremely seriously. We work through every one. We put back publicly what we've done with each comment, and if whatever draft we put out changes significantly, then we put it out again so that there's a second round. So we move very
It's helpful.
carefully with
Thank
industry.
you. Admiral Brown, since I'm almost out of time, let me ask you to address another question in addition, if you would. In San Antonio, we have an Operations Warfare Center at Lackland Air Force Base that you're probably familiar with, very similar to the National Counterterrorism Center. The Operations Warfare Center helps the Department of Defense in planning to stop or prevent cyber attacks. Do you think there's any possibility that kind of operations center might be a prototype and useful to the government in other areas?
Yes, sir. Tied to your first question, what we've established inside DHS is the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. It's an operations center to be able to look at and provide situational awareness. And tied to your first question, that's part of our relationship with the private sector. We have representatives there from an operational view. And so that has proved to be very effective in our ability to operate in the environment that we see.
Okay. Thank you, Admiral Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes a good friend from Illinois who we co-introduced the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act last Congress, which passed overwhelmingly, Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. I want to start out by asking a question of Dr. Jahanian and Dr. Strawn. In our 2009 hearing before this committee, one expert described the, quote, never-ending tug-of-war between security and usability. And this is I think, a very important issue that has at times been overlooked. I think we are now giving a better focus to this. So I just wanted to ask if you could describe how research in social, behavioral, and economic sciences can improve both usability and security, and also how is social science research incorporated into the soon-to-be-released R&D strategic plan? Whoever wants to start.
Thank you, Mr. Pinsky. I'll say a quick word on it, and then I'll turn to my colleague, since much of this work is done in the National Science Foundation. But the NIDRD program has had working groups in socioeconomic impacts of information technology for some time. It also has a subgroup of that group specifically in education purposes, which is a social science activity, I would say. The cybersecurity research program, research strategic program that we have has a dimension of seeking economic incentives for better cybersecurity practices. So I think that within the NIDRD program we have a number of cases where socioeconomic research is functioning and is a part of the overall picture.
Congressman Lipinski, you raised a very important point. The issue of cybersecurity goes far beyond technology. It involves human beings and involves human in the loop, if you will. 3 years ago when we launched the Trustworthy Cross-Cutting Program at National Science Foundation, we actually acknowledged that there are 4 components or themes to this program. One is security. How vulnerable is it to attack? A system is vulnerable to attack. Reliability. Does it work as it's intended? Privacy. Does it protect a person's information? And finally, usability. Can human beings use the system in an efficient way, in a secure way? I do believe that, in fact, the programs that we have launched in recent years directly address the usability issue. We have a number of research activities that are funded by National Science Foundation that recognize human in the loop and the interaction of human with computer systems. As part of our new initiative, we're also looking at cyber economic incentives. And if you permit me, in 30 seconds, I'll try to explain what that is. Consider the attacks that exploit human behavior, user behavior, weak passwords, for example. We're also seeing increasingly social engineering, where you receive an email and you click on a link in your email, and inadvertently one downloads a program that infects your computer and can be used for all sorts of malicious activities. So recognizing that, we need to look at human behavior, understanding human behavior, and also understanding the motivation of attackers, and be able to reconcile that with the technologies that we develop and technologies that we deploy. Also, we need to consider incentives that make cybersecurity ubiquitous. Why is it that not everybody is using good hygienes, if you will, when it comes to cybersecurity? How do you incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior? Also understanding the motivation behind bad actors, as I mentioned, and also understanding various kinds of user models. Incentives to facilitate adoption of trustworthy technologies is not just limited to the individuals. It also includes government agencies and the private sector. So understanding all of that plays an important and critical role in our solution and our approach to dealing with this important problem.
Thank you. And very short time I have left. What is being done, because I think cybersecurity education and building our workforce to address cyber challenges is very important. Is there anything that you're doing in K through 12 students, any of the agencies for education? Just quickly.
Yes, sir. From DHS, we have an ongoing relationship with the National Cybersecurity Alliance with a program called CSAVE, and that is very much focused on K through 12, and we're going to continue to build that capability.
And also with the National Initiative on Cybersecurity Education, we work as the lead, but the Department of Education is one of our partners and looking at that very issue.
NSF is also participating in that same activity and looking at this issue.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. And Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. In the Department of Defense, our weapon system developments take a very long time. They can easily take a decade. Obviously, in that decade, technologies are changing, some of them dramatically. So when we begin a development, we are interested in the technologies and how fast they can develop and what the asymptote is, what is the ultimate achievable. For an airplane, for instance, we're interested in stealth and how little can we look to the radar. On the other hand, we're also interested in how fast the capability of radars will grow so that they can see us, although we are really tiny. And then what about the capability of, once they've identified our airplane, of taking it out with a missile from another airplane or from the ground, or by and by maybe something from a satellite. A bit ago, Regina Dugan, the director of DARPA, was in my office, and I asked her if she could help us in that kind of an analysis, because we are looking to develop a new deep strike heavy bomber. And I have no idea which of those technologies is growing the faster, and I don't want to put billions of dollars in developing a plane that is simply going to be easily spotted and taken out of the sky when it's finally fielded 12, 15 years from now. She said, yeah, we really can help you with that sort of thing. And what she gave me as an example was something in cybersecurity, and she showed me a graph. And it showed that the lines of code that the bad guys use, the malware, is not increasing. But the lines of code that we are using to defend ourselves is increasing exponentially. Every month, every year, it gets bigger and bigger. What we're asking of this system is two things which kind of appear to be mutually exclusive. On the one hand, we want it wide open so that it is readily accessible. And on the other hand, we want it really secure. Are we going to be able to bend that curve, that exponentially increasing curve of the lines of code that we use to defend ourselves, or will our systems ultimately be consumed with the necessity of protecting themselves so they won't be able to do any useful work for us?
Congressman Bartlett, we should have you write our solicitations for National Science Foundation. You articulated the problem extremely well. The technology base for our systems is rapidly evolving. Every 3 to 5 years, we deploy new computers, new systems, because there are new functionalities that come out, the performance enhancements are real. The settings in which our computer systems are being deployed and the functionality that they provide also is not static. My belief is that future security challenges will follow adoption of Internet patterns that we see. For example, with mobile devices, with cloud computing, there are different settings that are going to impose new challenges for us. So you're absolutely right that the code base is increasing. The complexity of systems that we're trying to secure is definitely getting more challenging. We're also seeing an increasing trend towards cyber-enabled infrastructures and systems, such as power grids. Information technology has become so pervasive that we're seeing it in power grids, we're seeing it in the financial sector, transportation networks, and so on and so on. And it's been identified already, our national critical infrastructure has become so dependent on information technology and computer networks that the vulnerability is there and we need to do something about it. From a research point of view, our thoughts and our thinking, and I should say the thinking of the broader scientific community, is that we need to develop a scientific foundation for dealing with this problem. We cannot be just chasing the bad guys, trying to stay slightly ahead of the latest, essentially, attack and latest, essentially, trends that we see. The scientific approach must promote discovery of new laws, if you will. I mean scientific laws. We have to be able to do hypothesis testing. We have to be able to demonstrate repeatable experiments. We have to enable data gathering. We need new metrics. We need to have critical analysis to this problem. In doing so, I should just highlight that National Science Foundation did launch a program in our Trustworthy Computing program that focuses on the overall trustworthiness of our critical infrastructure, and it directly addresses the scientific foundation that's needed to solve this problem.
Thank you. Clearly, this affects just about every one of us and every part of our government. And I'm still not certain that we can bend that curve. It seems to me that we're going to be using ever increasing percentages of our capability just to protect ourselves. It's a huge problem. Thank you all for being involved, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing.
And thank you, Mr. Bartlett, for your expertise. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony today. Congressman Bartlett and I and other members of the Maryland delegation are very excited and proud that the new Cyber Command is going to be stood up at Fort Meade in our state, and we're trying to prepare for that as well as we can. And I wanted to go back and maybe give you all a little bit more time to speak to the question that Congressman Lipinski posed about how you prepare a workforce, because that's obviously something we're very interested in seeing happen in Maryland, and sort of where do you start? Where does that pathway, that career pathway to being ready to take these diverse set of job opportunities that cybersecurity will provide, chief security officers, analysts, forensics experts, et cetera. Where's that pipeline start? What is the kind of coursework you think is important to offer? What's the role of two-year colleges, community colleges, as well as the four-year colleges? And in particular, I'd be curious to have you speak to the complications with respect to security clearance. That always seems to be an issue. You can deliver up a cohort of highly qualified people, then they still have to jump through the security clearance process. Are there ways to anticipate that and integrate it into the educational process so that when they kind of graduate from the pipeline, they're actually ready to get right into the job? And so I offer that to any of the panel members to respond to. There's 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'll just say a quick overview about how important the NITRD program agrees or believes that these issues are. We have also recently been working on a strategic plan for the whole NITRD activity in addition to the strategic plan for cybersecurity. And the 3 pillars of the NITRD strategic plan are technology and its increasing partnership with us in new ways of use. That's pillar 1. Pillar 2 is trust and confidence, which we're here talking about today. And pillar 3 is a cyber-ready society. including pipeline issues of professionals and general knowledge for the public to fully utilize cyber. So we are focusing our efforts to focus on these activities directly.
Sir, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at DHS, but also want to right up front talk about what the teamwork is that you see here. We've already mentioned the efforts that NICE has. We've mentioned the fact that I think there are over 106 centers of academic excellence that DoD and DHS have been working on, the scholarship for service to identify people early on to be able to get them the right skill sets and afford them an opportunity to work for the government. We've also just recently started, again, DoD, DHS, doing the same type of Center for Academic Excellence for the two-year schools that you mentioned. The clearances are an issue, but part of what we've been doing, particularly under the NICE initiative, is to identify all the skills that are required, career paths. There are many that don't necessarily require clearances, and so we need to take advantage of that opportunity and the skills and the people that come there. And finally, from a DHS perspective, on that last point that you talked about, trying to bring them in so they're ready, we've started an intern program inside DHS. We look to, as well as a fellowship program, and we look to be able to take that model and expand it and bring it across the rest of the federal government. Just some of the things that we're doing, sir.
May I add a couple of points? As you probably know from my bio, in addition to my academic experience, I have private sector experience, particularly in the cybersecurity space. I think this problem of education, workforce development, curriculum development is extremely important to the nation. It's a very, very important problem that is being addressed by multiple agencies. I will highlight a couple of programs. Scholarship with Service that was mentioned. National Science Foundation has been extremely pleased with our involvement in the Scholarship for Service program. In particular, it is being offered at 34 institutions today, and more than 1,000 students who've graduated from this program have returned to government service. So it's a great success story. Another track related to Scholarship for Service includes capacity building. Again, we offer funds to universities and colleges to develop curriculum. And there are a number of center-scale activities that have been launched related to this, which involve multiple institutions collaborating, developing new curriculum, specifically in the cybersecurity area. Another program that I think is extremely important in terms of training technicians and training particularly entry-level positions is the Advanced Technological Education Program, which addresses directly the two-year colleges. In my testimony, I highlighted 3 regional centers. And again, it's a terrific success story, allowing individuals to be retrained or go through a 2-year program led by our community colleges, be trained, and go back into the workforce, particularly the government sector.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Strawn, in the administration's proposed legislation released in early May, you mentioned a few places where research and development is mentioned. For the sections you referenced, it is clear that NIDR-D would lead these efforts. Excuse me, is it clear that NIDR-D would lead these efforts? Is it necessary for that leadership to be explicitly defined in the statute?
Mr. Brooks, we're usually careful to use the words coordinate as opposed to lead in terms of the activities of the NIDR program, based on the fact that each agency has their separate mission, has their separate appropriations and appropriations committees, and our goal is to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts by bringing everyone together in terms of the knowledge of what's going on, finding ways to work together and collaborate. But given the way the government is organized, it seems to us that collaboration is the way we can best fulfill our mission.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Jahanian. Is there a current need for postdoctoral research fellowships in cybersecurity, and are cybersecurity postdocs eligible for already established NSF fellowship programs?
At this point in time, we don't believe that we need to have a separate postdoc program for the cybersecurity area in particular. As you probably know, information technology and computer science is a very hot, exciting area. There are jobs available for our PhDs all over the country in the private sector, in government, as well as our academic institutions. And yes, the postdoc funding that's available through National Science Foundation through my directorate that goes through our research programs is available to support postdocs across the field. I do want to highlight that during the recent economic crisis 2-3 years ago, we recognized that there were a number of bright minds who were getting their PhDs and were potentially leaving the research field. So we came up with a program which lasts only 2 or 3 years called Computing Innovation Fellows that allowed us to support postdocs specifically for a short period of time to maintain the pipeline for our research activities, research programs in academic institution and industry, and it's been a very, very successful program supporting more than 100 postdocs. But I don't believe in a long run this is something that we need to invest in. However, it's something that we're looking at and we're continue to consider.
Thank you. Another unrelated question to Dr. Jahanian. The FY12 budget request includes $12 million in new spending for cyber activities within the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. What is the need and purpose for this funding? Does SBE have appropriate expertise in cybersecurity issues to accomplish the goals of this funding, or will other directorates be taking the lead?
I briefly alluded to this issue of our need to address the role of human in dealing with cybersecurity challenges. First, let me state that we expect that there will be a single cybersecurity solicitation from NSF involving the SISE Directorate, SBE, and Office of Cyber Infrastructure. So these are not independent programs, they are going to be all under one umbrella. Second thing that I want to raise is that we expect fully to have scientists from various disciplines to participate in addressing some of the issues dealing with cybersecurity, including computer scientists, mathematicians, as well as economists. I responded to an earlier question about our thoughts toward cyber economic incentives, in particular dealing with the kind of threats that involve social engineering. By that I mean when you receive an email and you click on a link and suddenly your machine is infected, your computer is infected. So we need to understand incentives that make cybersecurity ubiquitous. How do we incentivize, as I mentioned, good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior? Understand the motivation behind bad actors and understand new user models. And I also mentioned that we need to incentivize a facilitation of adoption of trustworthy technologies by various government agencies as well as the private sector. So understanding all of that allows us to develop new technologies and incorporate some of that into the technologies that we expect will come down the road.
Thank you, Dr. Jahanian. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. As I mentioned, Congressman Lipinski and I introduced a cybersecurity enhancement bill last Congress that passed overwhelmingly. We plan to reintroduce that as early as next week. But we wanted to have the benefit of your testimony on this bill. I know you've had an opportunity to review the legislation. And if I could go, there are basically 4 major points to the legislation that I wanted to cover. And the first is it has to deal with Dr. Strawn and Dr. Furlani, the NIST standards, giving NIST the authority to set security standards for federal networks. Can you give me your comments in terms of whether that's helpful to the federal government? Dr. Strawn?
I think the fact that NIST has been involved with setting standards for us for the last decade, in my direct experience as CIO, has been very helpful. And so any additional responsibilities that NIST might take, such as identified in the proposed legislation, I think would be helpful.
Okay. Dr. Furlani?
We've been working in that space for some time, particularly thinking about the security aspects of domain name security and working to deploy that in the .gov and .com domains, and so I think it's a reasonable fit.
Yeah, the next area establishes a federal university private sector task force to coordinate research and development, and also authorizes, I think, much needed cybersecurity research and development programs. I think Dr. Jahanian, you may be best qualified to speak to that provision.
Yes, I think it's very important, and it's been already highlighted by others, that we need to involve the private sector as we think about addressing the issues that confront a country. Cybersecurity challenges that impact our economic security, national security, and of course public safety. So as I indicated already in my testimony, National Science Foundation and other agencies actively involve the private sector in how we approach cybersecurity in our research program, as I mentioned, our merit review program, in the workshops we run, SBIR, STTR. So expanding that and bringing the private sector and academics together, I think it serves the country well.
Well, thank you for that. And lastly, there's been a lot of talk about a cybersecurity workforce, professionals. The bill creates scholarship programs, both undergraduate and graduate, at the NSF, and that is to be repaid with federal service. So I think that question actually could go to both Dr. Jahanian and to Mr. Brown in terms of DHS having a cyber federal workforce. Dr. Jahanian?
Yes, the question was... As I indicated in answer to a previous question, I believe the issue of workforce development, education and curriculum development and capacity building is extremely important. It has to be at the center of our response to cybersecurity challenges. So this is very much aligned with the needs of the country.
Admiral Brown?
Sir, I think scholarship for service is extremely important. It's been great for us in the public sector. From DHS perspective, we have teamed extremely well with NSF on that, and we have reaped some of the benefits. Some senior leaders have been graduates of that program, as well as some of our phenomenal analysts. So it's a great program.
So I take that from the witness's testimony that you're all supportive of this legislation. Is that correct?
Yes.
You don't have to all yell at once. One last question, and this has to do probably more when I was ranking member on the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on Homeland Security, Admiral Brown. The Cyber Command is standing up at Fort Meade. In my home state, we have Lackland Air Force Base, which, as you know, conducts cyber operations, the more offensive operations. And the coordination between DHS and I think the DOD and NSA, to me, is very important in terms of the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing in the government. It seems to me you can't fully protect and defend the nation as DHS is charged with their mission if you're not coordinating with those who know the offensive capability the best. Has that enhanced over the years? And can you tell me, to the extent you can in an open setting, what your relationship is now with the Air Force?
Sir, the basic premise of your question, the answer is you've just described my job description. As the cybersecurity coordinator for DHS, my responsibility is to work with both NSA and with U.S. Cyber Command so that we are synchronizing. We are, from both the DOD and DHS perspective, aware of our operations, that we're capable of working together. And for U.S. Cyber Command, that means working with its components like the 24th Air Force. So that's part of my job, is to make sure that I'm providing that situational awareness to DHS so that we're prepared when we're looking at protecting the .gov and working with the private sector and the .com, and vice versa, to be able to provide that information, to be able to work with NSA and with the U.S. Cyber Command as they're executing their missions and responsibilities.
That's excellent news, because 5 years ago when we held hearings on the issue, that was not the case. There wasn't that kind of coordination. So I commend you for taking the lead on that, and I think that's going to make the country a lot safer. So thanks to the witnesses. We have one last round of questions, as I understand. Mr. Wu is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I understand, this may be the last question. I'm going to do the congressional hearing question equivalent of a core dump. There's been a lot of discussion about cloud computing. We have also migrated to mobile devices, a lot of computing there, a lot of information shared. Could whomever wants to address this address the security implications and challenges of cloud computing and mobile devices and directions to go to try to solve some of those issues?
Thank you, Mr. Wu. You've nailed some important questions right there, and they're illustrative of the history of IT. That every time we think we're on top of things, something new emerges, and therefore we have to sort of think it over again and start up. And we're always looking for basic principles like Dr. Jahanian was talking about, but many times we're simply reacting to the new technologies. It's certainly true that cloud computing, for one, is a potentially very important technology. The NIST activities have been taking some lead in that, and I'm sure that Ms. Furlani will have something to say about that. I have an opinion that once we're over the transition to cloud computing, we'll actually be in a more secure environment rather than a less secure environment, because we'll have people whose core competencies are to provide secure information and secure access to information. The various organizations that are required to provide that type of security for themselves, it isn't a core competency. So once we're over the transition, I look for actually superior security.
Yes, we are leading the federal government's look at how standards need to be deployed and worrying about the cybersecurity privacy and security issues, and we have recently published a special publication to look at those specific issues. It's out for public comment right now. We've also established proposed a definition for cloud computing, which has been taken up by everyone, so that we're all at least speaking on the same terms, so that we know what we're speaking about, which helps get us over that hump. The second piece I want to mention is the mobile devices. That's something we've been looking at, and again holding workshops on understanding what we need to be thinking about in that aspect from the standards and testing point of view.
Sir, just to build off of what Ms. Furlani had said, we've been active participants in that work, but to build off of, particularly with the cloud computing, the definitions and the interagency efforts that have been going on. But from a mobile device standard, U.S. CERT on a regular basis is putting out information to the public sector about what the threats are, their best practices that need to be done, and making sure that some of that is available as we continue to look at the employment and deployment of those capabilities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. The record will remain open for 2 weeks, and so members may have additional questions for you in writing. I would ask that you respond. With that, the witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Good team.
Good team.